So welcome everybody to the celebration of Farrell. I've been requested to try to keep this about an hour long. First we'll start with a musical number by Farrell's granddaughter, Taya Peterson. After that, it'll be followed by Jake and Justin and Jeff Peterson with memories of their dad.
I didn't know I was volunteered to go first.
But y'all know me, and you know the truth. That ain't me in that box there in front of you. Can I just get an amen? Y'all just get out of here. I got the best view ever, now that I'm way up here. Joking around with Jesus, catching up with Grandpa. Hurry up, preacher, I'm telling y'all, you should be fishing with a cold one in your hand. Instead of missing me here, y'all should be missing me there, high up in your deer stand. Save my truck, save my guns, and when they're old enough, give them to my sons. Don't let this stained glass shine on y'all too long today. Save the roses, save the roses, don't waste them on me. Tell who you love, how much you love them. Don't just say you know, you gotta show them every chance you get to know her better. Remember, forever don't last forever. Take it from me in my brand new point of view. The biggest regret of your life won't be what you did, it'll be what you didn't do. You should be fishing with a cold one in your hand. Instead of missing me here, y'all should be missing me there, high up in your deer stand. Save my truck, save my guns, and when they're old enough, give them to my sons. Don't let this stained glass shine on y'all too long today. Time is so precious, it ain't going away. You should be fishing with a cold one in your hand. Instead of missing me here, y'all should be missing me there, high up in your deer stand. Save my truck and save my guns, and when they're old enough, give them to my sons. Don't let this stained glass shine on y'all too long today. And save the roses, save the roses, save the roses. Don't waste them on me, don't waste them on me.
Well, Justin, I took the first one because that was your daughter, and it's not easy. It's been interesting being in that line and hearing all the memories and different perspectives that everybody had, and anywhere from our old neighbors telling us stories to old highway patrol people, and Bob made this a little harder for me than I needed to be at the beginning, but Tammy asked us to give a memory, and it's really, really hard to come up with just one. Sorry. Dad wasn't, when we were young, I don't remember ever hearing my father read me a book. It was always tell me stories. There was no Jack and Jill sort of a thing. It was me and Vernon, or me and somebody doing something crazy and stupid. And so that's some of my first ones, but most of my memories, looking back on it, all involve horses, camping, mountains, the things that he loved there. And if you watch the video for a little while, there was a Shetland pony that he was sitting on, so I told my wife that must have been when he wasn't being very good, because that's usually the only time Dad ever gone on it. But riding that horse above Mendon, those are some of the best memories that I have, and I just need to thank him, because all of those loves that he had, that I'm sure Jake and Justin will say something similar, I don't know. Justin might be shorter, but all of those things that he did with us to create those memories, each one of us boys has been able to pass on to our family and those loves. So that's what I got. So love you, Pop, and we'll see you on the other side.
Easy for me to be in the middle. That's where I've always been, where I like to be. Thank everybody for being here. As Jeff said, there was a lot of stories shared out there. A lot of new ones I actually heard that I'd never heard before. Got kind of a kick out of them. My dad was my best friend. My honest to God best friend. He was one of the top few people that I ever wanted to spend time with. We spent a lot of days and nights in the mountains together, and he's the one that taught me to be comfortable there, not be afraid. I wasn't going to tell this story, but real quick, when I was quite young, we lived in Mendon. We were above Mendon up there where Jeff was talking, and he said, you know, tomorrow the deer hunt starts, and I'd like to go down and get your brothers, and we'll come up here and go deer hunting tomorrow. And I'm like, well, perfect. He said, well, there's not enough room for all of us in our gear on this four-wheeler, so you stay here. Excuse me? Hey, you stay here. I'll be back in a few hours. And that jackass left me up in the mountains by myself at about 8 years old, and I was crying and scared. And he said, there's nothing up here that's going to hurt you. Just remember that. And I don't know, ever since then, I've been totally at ease in the mountains, before or after dark. So lessons valuable learned, I guess, from Dad there. As Jeff said, Dad had a great love for horses that he shared with many friends and family members. He and I, about the time I retired, he was retired, and we tried to, I guess it was before I retired, we tried to ride every week, at least once, and for years and years and years this went on, whether it was hunting or just getting together for a ride or going with Mortsons. And he taught me every trail, and I knew Logan Canyon and Blacksmith and some of these places like the back of my hand, and it was all because of him. Unfortunately, later in life, as these rides went on, I had to teach the trails back to him because he'd forget them. And he'd say, Jake, where are we? At first, I wasn't very patient. What do you mean, where are we? But we kept trying to train him, but I'm not sure it stuck towards the end. He was very comfortable horseback. One afternoon, we were riding out of bunch grass, and some birds flew up from under his horse, and Dad was sound asleep in the saddle. I think he was on your horse, Tammy, which was a little bit of a sleepy horse himself, but these birds fly up from out under him, and the horse jumped sideways, and Dad just, I swear, he sat there in the air like he was on cartoons, just suspended in midair, and then hit the ground in a pile of dust and cussed the spugs, he said, that flew up under him. We had a good laugh. I'm very thankful for all these memories that I had of him. We sure spent a lot of time together, and it's tough to look back with any regret, because there is none. I'd be remiss if I didn't say a sincere and heartfelt thank you to Tammy for her absolute dedication and love to this man till the day he died. The care that she provided for him and kept him out of that nursing home for so long blows us all away, and thank you very much for that. Neither Dad or I were much for prayers, but here's my stab at it. Lord, my pop's headed over your way. Please make sure he has somewhere warm and safe to stay. Somewhere with not too many folks around. Maybe somewhere just outside of town. Lord, find a spot along a creek where he can gather with friends and family around a roaring fire to celebrate memories of life down here. Sir, would you have them keep that fire going until we get there? For my old man, sir, there's just one last thing I'll ask you to provide. Lord, if you can spare it, cut out a nice stout sorrel gelding for him to ride. Till then.
Wow, thanks y'all for coming. You know, it was interesting, like Jeff had said and Jake had alluded to sitting in that line and getting to see all of you and hearing some stories that maybe weren't even appropriate for that line, especially if that line had been somewhere else. So I'd like to thank the folks here that just what a fantastic job they've done for us and our family, and thank you guys for coming and celebrating Dad's life with us. Even though, and it's been said and said again, those last few years were damn tough. Thank you, Tammy, for all that you've done. I wanted to share a story or two. I had 2 or 3 actually that I felt were kind of fitting, and one of them, we moved back from Layton to that Mendon house, and Jake, you'll remember every Christmas. I imagine all you guys did it when you were kids too. But hell, we had every present under the tree unwrapped and rewrapped before we even went and woke Mom and Dad up back then at that age. And one particular Christmas, we'd done our normal thing, and after we'd wrapped everything back up, thinking we were sneaky, went and got Mom and Dad up. And Dad tells me, he's like, well, that's great. Merry Christmas. Go out to the barn and get the chores done. And I thought, you gotta be shitting me. What? I maybe didn't think that at that age. That's what I thought now. And I just thought, what is the deal? And so I begrudgingly stomped out there to feed the horses while everybody was getting up on Christmas morning. And to my surprise, there was Tony the Pony. Bob, I don't know if you brought him in the night or how he got there. There was no chimney on that barn, so I know Santa Claus didn't stuff him down there. And I don't know if Mom and Dad had a particular relation with Santa or how he knew that horse was in there, but there he was, big as life, big red bow on his neck in that first stall as you walk in the door. And Jake, I don't remember that you went with me. I think I was out there by myself, but I went back to the house as fast as you can imagine to share the news and whatnot. Later on, we was on a horse ride above town there, and that's just what we did a lot as a family. And I think, Jake, you were on Tony the Pony, if I am not mistaken, and the rose bush over on the Taylor piece got stuck under his tail, and holy cow, he took off. He was about to come off. I think you rode him out, but Dad and I sure laughed. We thought that was the best thing ever. So that was the first horse that we'd got to call our own, and we rode the guts out of that little thing. And then later on, I got to be a little older and I wanted a bigger horse. And old Concho wasn't much bigger than Tony the Pony, but he was a little bigger, and we got him from Uncle Clark. Well, it was, I can't remember, $500 or something like that Dad we had to pay for that horse. And I had a love of trains when I was a kid, kind of like my own son. And Dad loved them too, and we had his old train set for years, and it sat in that basement house. And in order to get that horse, he made me sell that train set. And you can't imagine how many times I wish I hadn't had to have done that. I can buy a lot of horses now, but I can't get that train set back. And I'm sure he regretted it too later, but I'll bet he stuck that $500 in his pocket and put it on the next horse down the road anyway. So we went through a lot of horses and a lot of horse rides, and most all of them were excellent, great memories, although we did get in a few jackpots, didn't we, Bob? Yeah, there was a few. But anyway, one other memory that I wanted to share was as we got a little older. We talk about, when we was kids, but as we got a little older, I was going to ask Shelly if she'd go get a hold of Randy Allman and see if we could get a coffee cup for the display in there, because how many of you sat there with him and me and whomever in Glouser's and there in Logan and sat and drank coffee. The amount of time that we spent there and the problems that were solved and maybe some problems that were created, I don't know, but I never did ask you, Shelly, where are you to get that cup. I'll bet he's still got some, though. I would like to get one if we ever see him. But and I'd like some of that coffee, too. That was some of the best coffee around, and you can't get good coffee like that anymore. But that was sure a good time that we had and spending there with Dad. And sometimes it was while he was still working and in uniform, and later it was when he wasn't. So anyway, I wanted to share those few memories with y'all, and I hope you'll take a few minutes, those of you that have some great memories like that. I know there's nothing too recent, and Tammy, again, thank you for all you've done for him. But please feel welcome to come on up, and if you can't get up, we'll just listen. But share some of your own memories of him. What a great man, and we'll miss him. And it's like I said when a lot of you called, which thank you, by the way, that means a lot, and it means that I'll do that for others in the future. but Dad's riding a better horse on the other side, or his favorite horse on the other side. So, thanks, Dad.
So at this time, I'd like to open up the mic to anybody that wanted to come up and talk. And I'll start with sharing my memory of Farrell. So Tamara announced, it's my first memory of Farrell, actually. Tamara announced she was dating a cop. Very apprehensive. I don't know about cops. I had a 1968 Firebird. My only experience with cops is when I was looking at him handing my driver's license out the window. So Tamara one day thought she'd break the ice and invite us to a dance. So we went out to a dance. I think the place was called Paybacks back then. Probably doesn't even remember. Pulled up in Farrell's truck. We all piled in the front seat. That was back before club cabs. So we were all jammed in that front seat. We drove over to Paybacks. Live band, loved it. And I noticed Farrell was not acting like a cop. He was dancing, having a great old time. God, this guy's human. And then later on, after that day, the more I got to know Farrell, I realized he's not only human, he's got a lot of humanity in him. He passed that on to his kids. I don't think Farrell took any pleasure in ruining anybody's day unless they deserved it. So he was a great guy. And part B of that story is Farrell had he was very apprehensive of meeting my parents. But as soon as he saw me, he told me he felt great. And I don't know what that means. Farrell was a great guy.
So most of you don't know me, some of you do, but I'm going to suggest that I probably knew Farrell earlier in his life than anybody else, most anybody else in this room. So I'm going to tell you some stories of his early life. I was probably, my name is Brad Blau. And Farrell was basically raised as my brother, or I was raised as his. And I spent a lot of time at Axel and Alice's house, my grandfather and my grandmother, and we would spend a lot of time together playing. And Farrell was 4.5 years older than me, 5 years older than me, and he treated me like a younger brother and not a nephew. And so we had a farm, and still do, in Nibley, up Blacksmith Fork Canyon, and he would come and visit us. And it was a hot day in July. And Farrell's personality, by the way, hasn't changed since he was a young kid. Brad, I was 6, and he was 11. And we lived really close to the Blacksmith Fork River. The Blacksmith Fork River was literally 40 feet out the front of our house. And then there was another canal, irrigation canal, that ran in front of it. Brad, it's hot. Let's go down and wade in that irrigation canal. And the irrigation canal was running heavy, and it was next to the river, and we just decided that sounded like fun. So my mother, who was Farrell's oldest sister, was supposed to be watching us because he was 11 and I was 5. And so I said, let's go. And so we went, and we had a great time at cooling off in this canal, but we didn't tell anybody where we were. And all of a sudden I heard this yell from my mom, and what are you doing there? And she had stopped. She was so worried because we didn't know where we were. She had stopped along the road and cut a willow switch. And she had that willow switch, and she came down, and she finally found us. We were playing, we were actually floating in this river underneath the road through the culvert there that's just down near our house, right? You remember that. And we were floating underneath the culvert and coming up and crossing the road and floating under the culvert. And she had that willow switch. And she switched Farrell and me all the way home, right? And that was one of the first things that I learned, is that you always had to make sure that when Farrell had an idea that you didn't get in trouble. He used to go on vacations with us all the time. And you need to tell me when to shut up. But we used to go on vacations together all the time. We'd go to San Diego and visit our aunts and uncles, our aunt and uncle who lived in San Diego, Audrey and Don. And by the way, their kids regret not being able to be with us today, but they just couldn't make it up. But their hearts are with us. And so we would visit the beach, and Farrell loved the beach, and he loved to visit San Diego. But the one trip that I'm thinking of is he went with us to the Four Corners area. We know where Montezuma's castle is. I don't know if you've ever been there. But that was before it was really, really strict with what you could do as you hiked around the park. And our family was there. I don't know, Cindy, if you remember when we went to Montezuma. Dino, do you remember going to Montezuma? But we had this great hike up around. It was incredibly nice. But Farrell and I lagged back just a little bit, and he said, "Brad, look at this trail. We need to go walk on that trail." Well, everybody else was ahead of us. All right, okay, Farrell, we'll go walk on this trail. And I was probably 9, and he was 14, 15. And so we went walking on this trail. Didn't tell anybody again what we were doing. And my mom, she was so worried about us that we'd fall off those walls of the Montezuma's castle. But we heard about that for the rest of the trip, that we probably shouldn't have wandered off in this park. But that's Farrell. Just before I turned 18, and just before I left the house for a while, Farrell had just returned from, and Trina had just returned from the military in Washington, D.C. And they had, I think, Jeff, I think you were with us by then, I'm not sure, but we were working, he was temporarily, before he joined the Highway Patrol, he went down to Salt Lake and took all the tests and all that other stuff, but he barely made the height limit. Have you been told this story? Yeah, he barely made that height limit. You ought to tell this story. It's a great story. I was working at Tri-Miller Packing Company, and he was working at Tri-Miller Packing Company, and we worked together, shoulder to shoulder, for about 9 months, 10 months. But he was so excited to get on the patrol. But he says, "I'm a little too short." I think he was a half-inch shorter than the minimum that they had at that time. So when he had, I don't know if it was his grandpa or somebody else, but when he went down to take the height test, the physical, he rode in the back of that truck, and he had a sling around his chin, and he was laying in the back of that truck, and he was stretched himself the whole time he went. He was a half-inch shorter over the height requirement when he went down. But that whole sling thing was his idea. He knew that he'd probably be able to stretch himself that much to qualify for the Highway Patrol, or he wouldn't have qualified at that time. But we had, and then unfortunately, guys, I left, and that was about the time that I left the Valley and didn't return until about 3 years ago. And even then, I haven't been here long, so I wasn't able to be part of the family as much as I wanted to be, because we were very, very close as we were growing up. And we've always loved and appreciated Farrell for who he is and what he's done, and how good of a friend he was to me and my siblings. And I watched from afar how good of a family man he was, and how he was to your family. But those memories are the ones that are indelibly etched in our hearts. And Farrell is one that when that etching happens, it never goes away. And we'll always remember him fondly with great love, And what a good man, and what a good dad, what a good family member. Thank you.
Here I am, following Brad again. He's such a good speaker, and I'm not. But I also remember all of the family vacations that we went on, and all the fun times we had with Farrell growing up. I remember times when we were just a little bit older, and I think all of us girls that were about the same age, we all had a crush on Farrell, because he was just so cute, and he treated us all so good. And so I think it was Sally that he'd be there at the house, and we'd be in at Grandma and Grandpa's, and he'd have a date, and they'd be out on the patio, and so we'd sit and look out the window and spy on him. Was that you? Yeah, we always liked Farrell. He always was so good to all of us. And, you know, later in years, Tammy and Farrell were our best friends. We did so many fun things together, and I just can't single too many of the memories out because there was just so many. But Tammy and Farrell would come to Moab after we moved down there, and we'd go explore all of the Indian ruins and the countryside down there riding four-wheelers, and they were always willing to go anywhere, do anything with us. And we did some pretty crazy things, but we went to Lake Powell together, did, you know, the houseboat things a few times, and we just had so much fun all the time. And we liked doing all that, but I think our most favorite thing that we did was we'd go out and explore in the West Desert, out by Park Valley and out in that area. And we'd take the four-wheelers out, and we would ride for hours every day. And then we would all just be filthy, and we had the solar showers that we'd set out, and we'd all have to shower because we just couldn't stand ourselves if we didn't. But we had such a great time doing that. And one time we took my husband's parents' motorhome out there, and so we were coming back, and Farrell was laying on the one bench sleeping. And Tom Dooley come on the radio or the tape, whatever we had in, and he laid there sound asleep and sang that whole song. He was really talented. But we just had so many fun times, and we've really missed those times. But like they all say, Tammy took such good care of Farrell, and we love those guys dearly. Thank you.
My name is Misty Johnson. I'm Kevin's daughter. Tammy's my aunt. Farrell's my uncle. I debated on telling this story just because if my grandpa were here sitting next to us, he might be a little bit embarrassed by this, but he's on the other side now and beyond any egoic embarrassment, and so he's given me his go ahead from the other side. I also want to preface this story by saying that the behavior that I'm about to describe for my grandpa, Sheldon Moore, was not what I remember my grandpa. It was very unusual based on his age and dementia, and so not typical. Just keep that in mind. Okay, so we were at my grandma and grandpa's house for Christmas, and it was probably the last Christmas that we had at their house before my grandpa went into the funeral home. And my grandparents had plastic oranges and plastic bananas. You probably remember this plastic fruit sitting on the table. My youngest daughter, Macy, was 3 at the time, and she was an out-of-control toddler. And she just thought that that fruit looked so amazing, had to have it, grabbing it. And I don't know why, but Grandpa was very, very protective of this fruit. And so they had a battle, an enormous battle. Grandpa had a meltdown. It was like nothing I've ever seen before. But finally, we were able to get the fruit out of Macy's claws and calm down, and we all just kind of relaxed a bit. And then my sister came walking into the kitchen, had no idea that this huge battle had just taken place. And she sees the fruit on the table. She goes, "Oh, bananas!" And this grave, very warning voice from behind us says, "I wouldn't do that if I were you." We look behind us, and there's Farrell just trying his darndest not to smile. But in that moment, that's exactly what we needed, because he was able to diffuse the tension in the room and bring in a little bit of humor. If anybody's ever had an out-of-control toddler, they know just how hard it is. So we really appreciated Farrell in that moment. And to this day, whenever my husband and I talk about Farrell, we always give a grave, "I wouldn't do that if I were you" comment. So Farrell was a great man, great sense of humor, and we'll very much miss him.
I had a great pleasure of knowing Farrell when he was a trooper and I worked with him, and so I knew the very, well put together, always professional on the radio, just stoic. He was a great professional guy. And then I had the pleasure of becoming his daughter-in-law a few years later, and needless to say, there was 2 Farrells. So I absolutely had, well, let me back up. So before I even started dating Jake, I had not ever rode a horse. I grew up in Logan, which may as well have been New York City, because I had absolutely no idea what I was ever doing, but I had the joy of going on a lot of horse rides with Jake and Farrell, and a few with Justin and Jeff too. But Farrell was always so patient, because I mean, even to this day, I don't even always still saddle my own horse. So he always had to wait for Jake to get his stuff ready and get my stuff ready. And Farrell I know he was always just thinking, why, like, just leave her home sometimes. But then I got a lot of more confidence and experience, and it worked out good. But we had one horse that I was a little bit out of my league on, and the horse was fine, but it would not cross things like walking. It was like part frog, and it would jump over every bit of water, like a little ditch, rocks. I swear that thing would not put all 4 legs, and I would never expect it, and I would every time scream, and every time Farrell would laugh, and just I don't know, he got a big kick out of me trying. Thank goodness that they didn't like video things back then, but anyway, I really enjoyed all the time that I got to spend with him in all those years. And he was an incredible father-in-law. I know Mandy and Michelle would agree that he just was easy to be around. And it was always, we'd have some family get-togethers, and you almost set your clock by it. And Farrell would get up, and it's like, well, Grandpa's ready to go. So he definitely put up with all of us and our noise and kids. Every once in a while, he was pretty always just willing to just sit and watch. And every once in a while, one of the grandkids would do something or say something or add a swear word to their sentences when they were like this big, and he would laugh and laugh and laugh. But anyway, he was a great man, and I was super, super glad to know him for so long. So.
I always remember Farrell being one of the funniest people I've ever met. I remember shortly after Tammy and Farrell had built their cabin, I walk inside and I just hear them hooting and hollering upstairs out on the balcony, and I go up there and I see them and they're just having fun, and I was like, "What's that?" He's like, it's a spud gun, potato gun. I was like, "Oh, cool." And I was like, "Can I try it?" "Oh, I don't see why not." Little did I know he was going to strap me with a 4-foot homemade bazooka. Here he is, spraying all his propellant into the back of it, right? And he closes it up really tight. He's like, "Just flick it." I just remember, boom! Thing shot about 2 football fields long. Almost hit the road. Scared me. And then we just all laughed and had fun. But I just remember him just being one of the funniest people I know. And I loved every moment I got to share with Tammy and Farrell. And just to see them together too. Like, they would just always tease each other. And it was just love. It's true love. And I'll miss it.
All right, I promised my cousins I'd keep it together on this one. I'm Jake's son, but I cry like Jeff. So sorry, Jeff.
Thanks, bud.
A couple stories I've thought of as this day was coming that I might share. When I was probably, it was between 10 and 13, I was starting to feel like I was grown up, but I certainly wasn't. I went out to help my grandpa haul some hay in Millville, a little field probably 4 or 5 blocks from his house that he had bought, and just needed one of the grandkids to help him out. His back wasn't what it used to be, and I remember he would just put the truck in first and kind of just let me steer. He'd be out putting the small bales on the first couple levels, and then we'd switch when it got a little bit higher. And honestly, none of it was very exemplary hay stacking. We didn't ever let it get too high. But it came time to go back to the house, and I was driving the truck, and we get to the edge of the field, and I undo my seatbelt, and I go to get out, and he's like, "What are you doing? Just drive to my house." And I'm like, "Really?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I mean, he just was like, "What is your problem? Like, what? Just drive to the house." And I'm like, "Okay, well, like, you'll have to make sure I go the right way." And so I'm kind of driving along. I'm just going super slow. And the whole time he's looking at me like, "What is your deal?" Right? Like, just drive to the house. And we pull in, and I'm like, "I cannot believe that you had me do that." And he's like, "Why?" And I'm like, "I'm 13. And he's like, "You're what?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm 13. And he's like, "Well, we just won't tell your dad." And then we got out and started unstacking the trailer. But that's one story I had. And then one other one, when I was a little bit younger, I was probably between 5 and 7. My grandpa and I used to go on these side-by-side rides up above Hardware, up towards Bug Lake, and we'd always take the Red Ryder BB gun with us, and I'd shoot. Honestly, it was usually butterflies and puddles. So, and I remember driving along, and I wasn't driving at the time, contrary to what he probably would have preferred, but we were driving along, and we see a bull moose in the velvet off the side of the road, 80, 100 yards, and I'm like, "Oh, it's cool." And we're sitting there looking at it, and I'm like, "Do you think I could shoot that with the BB gun?" And he's like, "Sure." And so I get out, and I remember aiming high and let her rip, and I actually think I hit it, and it ran off. And anyway, I felt really bad after that, but it was a good memory, and I'm pretty sure the moose lived. But yeah, I have actually shot a moose. So there's no pictures, no trophies, but I have with my grandpa. So yeah, there's a couple of stories for you, and I'll miss him. He was a great man. Just thank everybody for coming. He will be missed. Thank you.
Well, Farrell wasn't Farrell to me, he was Fudd. Uncle Fudd is what I called him, and I met Farrell back in about 73. I married into the family, and it took a while, but we got to be real good friends. And we decided, let's go out rabbit hunting. I says, well, I got a couple snowmobiles. And he says, well, I'll get my pickup. And he says, let's go out and shoot a bunch of rabbits. I said, hey, man, that sounds fun. Oh, so we went out to Park Valley, and I thought, and what he wanted to do, he says, let's just take pistols and give him a chance. I thought, oh man, here I'm going to go hunting or with a guy that knows how to shoot pistols because he's in the highway patrol and everything else. I thought, well, yeah, that's fine. So we went out there and we started scaring rabbits on our snowmobile, and we would, and of course they'd run, they wouldn't stop for us. And I thought, gee, Farrell, you're not a very good shot. And he thought the same thing about me, because I don't think we might have shot one or two in about a 6-hour hunt, but we had so much fun. You know, we just enjoyed one another, and I would say I'd call him my best friend. But on the way home that night, we were driving back, and I said, well, Farrell, I said, you know, if you ever get into a situation that there's a standoff, I says, you better call for backup and let them go in first, you know. But anyway, he was probably, I would say Farrell was probably my best friend and I'm going to miss him, and I just adore you, Aunt Tammy.
I didn't know Farrell very well, but the first time I met him, my husband and I, actually we weren't married then, we're coming home from a Christmas vacation that we decided to take at a spur of the moment. So we stopped in Layton to see them, and I knew that he was a highway patrolman. So I asked Farrell what his most interesting story was on the highway patrol, and he told us about the between Layton and Bountiful. They came, him and whoever his partner was, came upon a RV that was off of the road. I don't know if it was tipped over and off. I don't remember the total story, but upon investigation, a man had. It was at night, and a man had given his wife the wheels, and he went to the back to sleep, and she had taken the cruise control and put it on because she had to go to the bathroom. So I guess she'd gone to the restroom, and of course the RV went off the road. And that was so every time I pass that between Layton and Bountiful, I think of Farrell and his story, his highway patrol story. And I know my husband and him were very close, and this is a difficult thing for him. And he's just a really good guy that that we hear about, and from stories from Cindy. So.
Well, this is different. And as Omeni has said, I mean, there's so many stories, and I feel like I say so many stories, but I've been in and out of here since '97, and I came first time. I'm Mark, by the way, sorry. Cousin to Tammy and Kevin and Laurie. And in 1997, I came to Logan first time, first out of university, and I actually have an American passport because my dad was from here, and I came into his citizenship. And this was my first trip to US. And watch and behold, more or less by coincidence, I go visit to ski in Salt Lake City, and I say, well, I got family here. And I called to my mom, I got a phone number, and I called my auntie, and I think the day after they came and picked me up and brought me up here to what is now super amazing bonus family that I didn't even know I had when I grew up in Denmark. And one of the most amazing experiences I had was being invited to Tammy's and Farrell's house out in Hiram. And there wasn't really a plan for how long I was going to stay or anything, but I probably always saved my welcome since I spent several weeks there. And meeting Farrell and first time seeing his smile and eyes with all this love, and just such a happy and loving person and sparkling because of that humor. He took me out in his police car. This guy from Denmark, I mean, anyways, I was still getting accustomed to American culture and stuff, and he took me out in the police car under the pretense of calibrating breathalyzers. That's very important stuff. So he drove me to Wyoming and a big loop around down Salt Lake City and up here. So not only did I get my first picture of myself in jail with a tag on as one of the pranks he pulled, but all the stories he told me on that trip, I mean, the lay of the land, it was unbelievable how I was just sitting there just absorbing all that. And this eyes for nature, the first bald eagle he spotted up in a tree, and a porcupine that took a nap in a tree while driving around Bear Lake, all that was so new to me, and that was just the beginning. I kept coming back, obviously, and we had so many trips down to Moab, Steve and Cindy, which is in '99. I mean, gosh. And always just fun and laughter, and what a loving guy. And he'll be missed deeply. So, thanks.
There may be 6 people in this room who know who in the world I am. My name is Darren Henry. I had the privilege of working at the Cache County Sheriff's Office 100,000 years ago when I was a lot skinnier and had a little more hair. And at that time I had the pleasure of working with Farrell. What he did for the Highway Patrol for most of his career, he was kind of an unsung hero in that he was responsible for all of the intoxilizers, breathalyzers, this kind of thing in the northern end of the state of Utah. And you'd look at Farrell and you'd go, wow, what a cush job. Well, the fact of the matter of it is he made it look like a cush job because he was so professional in what he did. And one of the things that was required in that job is that he would, if it wasn't stipulated that the machines were working properly, he would have to appear in court and explain that they were working properly. And he had a briefcase that he carried all of this information around in for every single machine in Weber, Morgan, Boxelder, Cash, Rich. And was he responsible for Davis County too, Bob? I don't remember. Davis County. So it was a really big job. But back in the day, we had a thing that was lovingly referred to as a dial-a-drunk. It was a mechanical kind of a machine that took a lot of human interaction to run and to make sure that it was working properly. And if you were not honest in what it was you were doing, those results could be altered. And the time came that this big, beautiful, new whiz-bang, all-electronic, wonderful computerized machine came into the market, and they were quite expensive. And the Highway Patrol wanted to get enough money out of the state legislature that they could buy enough of these machines to replace at least half of everything in the state of Utah. And that dollar figure at the time was around a couple of million. And to reach that goal, the patrol brought in their experts, one of which was Farrell, to tell the Senate Financial Committee why they needed the money to replace the machines that were already out there. And they also brought in a couple of chemists, a gentleman from Weber State University College at the time, and they testified at this committee. And the legislature, in their infinite wisdom, said, no, we don't need to spend the money for that. Just keep doing what you're doing. And so they were quite disappointed. Fast forward about 8 months. I and a sergeant from the sheriff's office made a DUI arrest in Smithfield. Probable cause for the stop was this Datsun 280ZX was going 73 miles an hour in a 40-mile-an-hour zone. Got the guy out of the car, talked to him for a minute, said, okay, we're going to do a couple of tests, and have him stand up, arms out, head up, touch your nose. And he made it as far as feet together, arms out, head back, and he continued right over backwards. So I caught him before he hit the ground. In hindsight, I probably should have let him hit the ground. His name was Henry J. Omana. He was a third-string quarterback at Utah State University, and as so, he qualified for a particular defense attorney whose name I shall not mention. However, he was also part of this Senate subcommittee in the financial hearing that Farrell had testified in. The clock rolls a little further down the road. It's time for trial. This particular attorney had 3 cases that day, 2 of them in the circuit court in Logan and our case in Smithfield. The way things had gone, the case in Smithfield was the last one. The first 2 in Logan, they were found not guilty. Farrell came to the 3rd case in Smithfield, testified that the machine was working the way it was supposed to work. The defense attorney got up, asked some questions, and in his closing arguments, he said, You all know who I am. I would never defend a guilty person. Okay. But what you need to do is telegraph a message to the Cache County Sheriff's Office and the Utah Highway Patrol that we're sick and tired of you doing shoddy work with shoddy equipment. Probably the only time in my life I ever saw Farrell without a smile on his face. He stayed in the court, waited for the jury to come back in, and 3 out of 3, this defendant was found not guilty. Farrell stood up with his briefcase in hand and walked out of the courtroom. You could tell just by the way he was striding, he was not a happy camper. This particular attorney had violated the trust of the Highway Patrol by using everything that the troopers had talked about in that financial circumstance to shoot down the way this machine worked and put him and the patrol in a bad light. And I couldn't blame Farrell for his reaction. I had one very similar. I looked at the particular attorney as we were walking out of court, and I said, you know, if I had to look at your face every morning in the mirror while I was shaving, I think I'd slit my throat. And I walked out. A couple of days later, I saw Farrell at the sheriff's office, and he said, you know, Darren, don't worry about it. We were talking about this case. He says, don't worry about it. You know, we have good days, we have bad days. Some we win, some we lose. But you know what I've found out is that everything kind of comes around. If we don't get him this time, we'll get him next time. And you know, Farrell was 100% correct. Because later that year, Mr. Henry J. Omana was arrested for DUI again. And this time, he wasn't released on his own recognizance. That same particular attorney brought in a check from his company's trust fund to bail Henry out of jail. And the sweet part about it is, on the second arrest, Henry disappeared back into Southern California, never to be seen or heard from again. And so that bail had to be forfeited to the court out of that attorney's trust fund account. So in learning that, I went back and told Farrell about it, and he had that typical Farrell smile on his face. And he looked at me and he shook his head and he says, you know, that's just the way life is. So I always remember Farrell with that fun smile on his face. In the video, there's one picture of him in a red shirt with that smile and that twinkle in his eye that always make you wonder, what do you know that I don't?
Thank you, everyone, for participating in the celebration of Farrell. We'll soon have a dedication of the grave, and right after that, there will be a lunch right here at White Pine.